Hello, and welcome to the Christian Faith Publishing Author Roundtable. I'm your host, Chris Baker, and for the next half hour, we'll be speaking with several very talented authors about their newly released books, what their inspiration was for creating their unique stories, and why it would be a great book for you to read and share with your friends and family. Of course, in this day and age, it's easy to get into the trap of, when you're working, just another day, another dollar sort of mentality. But this book that we're going to talk about next is really a great book to help get out of that rut. The book is called The Diamond Project, Rediscover the Gems Within by author Bill Fournier Ph.D. Bill, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, tell everybody a little bit about this book and the premise behind it.
Well, the premise behind it is really, there's an overriding story, there's an overriding theme of Sophie and Mason, and Mason's really struggling. A lot of people, they survive tremendous tragedy and come out the other side, and for me, it was a much more subtle tragedy. I was the guy that went to work every day and came home and sat in front of the TV screen until it was time for bed. And I got to the point where I wondered if there was anything more. And a lot of people were saying the same thing. So I read all the books, all the 12 steps, 8 steps, 9 steps, how to do this, how to become more successful here and there. And then one day it kind of dawned on me, I guess, that those were their success stories and they weren't mine. And they weren't working for me. And so I said, well, what's a different way to look at it? And I said, rather than looking outside for help, why don't I look inside? And so I started to look inside and turn off the noise, and I realized that we all have our own gems. We're all given all the tools we need. They're all the God-given gifts, and so many times, so much noise that we don't ever recognize them. And I call them the diamonds, our own diamonds. And when I started doing the research for this, I was amazed at how similar mining natural diamonds is with developing our own diamonds from the inside. And so that's really the premise of the book. And we follow Mason's story. He sits down with Sophie, and Sophie kind of guides him and gives him some ideas, and he has to go back and work on it and give it some thought and do a little legwork to start to realize some of these things that he's really good at doing, things he really enjoys doing, and actually rediscovering his own gems, his own diamonds.
Now, what do you think is probably one of the main contributors for people kind of getting into that rut of, just going to work, come home, like you said, just sit in front of the TV until it's time to go to bed, and then do it all over again?
I think there are a lot of reasons. I think, one, it's we settle. I think, two, we raise our families, we have our mortgages and our car payments and all of those things, and that's important to do, but it's more of an excuse sometimes, and I don't want to rely on that as an excuse. The thing that frightens me the most is the parable of the talents. I never wanted to get to a place where now I have to be responsible and accountable for my talents, and I didn't take advantage of them. And I think we all have them, but we get caught up in the noise. It's hard to hear what you're here for when you don't block out the noise. And I think that's something that we really I used to drive an hour back and forth to work. Mm-hmm. And I talked to a colleague at the time, and I told him, I said, you know what I'm doing? I'm shutting the radio off on the ride and just listening to me. And he said, I could never do that. That's insane. And I think that's the rut we get into. That's the habit that we get into. And then before you know it, time's flying by.
What do you think is a good first step for people to get out of that rut?
I think a great first step is to shut the TV off. Mm-hmm. I think a great first step is to go for a walk and really start to think about. I asked a colleague of mine years ago, I said, if you'd won the lottery, and this is in the book, if you'd won the lottery, and it was a special lottery in that not only did you get millions of dollars, but you got all the certifications, all the qualifications you ever needed to do anything you wanted, what would you do? And I said, here's the ticket, though. You have 6 months to have fun. You have 6 months to travel, do whatever you want to do, but at the end of 6 months, you have to report back to the commission as to what you will do now for the rest of your life that will help people, help benefit other people. And if you don't, you got to give it all back. And her response was interesting. She said she would take her 2 dogs and train them for pet therapy to go into an extended living situation or a hospice, something like that. And personally, I thought that was a tragedy because she's got such a gift, right? If you want to call them gems, she's got such gems, and when is she going to put them to use? When she wins the lottery. How many people are not going to benefit from her genius? And those are the things that really got me thinking. So answer that question. What would you do if you didn't have to worry about all the other things that we let get in our way? And they're important, I understand, but I think we're here to serve other people. I think there's a basic understanding of them. And that's really the the message behind the book, is being able to find out what that is that drives you and then put it to use to help other people.
Well, yeah, I think this is going to be an excellent book for people to take a lot away from and really to better themselves in the world around them. The book is called The Diamond Project, Rediscover the Gems Within by author Bill Fournier, Ph.D. You can pick it up at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, and Kobo, just to name a few of the locations. And Bill, thank you for being on the show today.
Well, thanks again, Chris. I appreciate being with you.
And now on the Christian Faith Publishing Author Roundtable, we have an interesting book I'm excited to talk about. The book is called Jesus Christ, the Messiah Visitation, a true story and testimony with inspired nature and Bible poems by author Ronald Williams. Ronald, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, Chris.
Now tell everybody a little about this book.
Yes, the book is based on a true story. It's experience with the Lord in person, a great experience, which I had to write down. The Lord answered my prayer. Decent time ago now, 21 years. The Lord started, and I had to write it down. He showed up in person, in flesh and bone. I think it's unlike any other experience that I know of. So I had to write it down in the book.
Let's talk a little bit about the book itself. Of course, it is your story and it's your testimony, but it's also mixed with some poetry as well. Tell everybody a little bit about how it was to one, write your story, and then to intertwine it with the poetry that's in the book.
Yes, the experience inspired me to write the story, and the experience inspired me to write the poetry. Yes, it's all with the Lord doing. I learned how to write poetry in junior high school. I received an A+, but I had put it away. But the Lord brought it back up, inspired it with this experience. Like with the poem In Jesus' Name, it's just something the Lord inspired me to put down on pen, and it's very powerful. It's a rhyming poem, and it just powers the name of Jesus. Every time I look at it and read it, I just get empowered. Nature, too. Everything is amplified and inspired. And I had to write it down, too. And all that glorifies the Lord. And His work. Amen.
When people pick up this book, what do you hope is the most important message they get from it?
The Lord is alive, working. He wants us to do His will and work and just be empowered. He's able and have faith and tell everyone, the whole world, that He is real, He's true, and He's a real person.
Now, do you have any other things you'd like to write about? Any books in the future?
I got inspired to write a few more poems. They're on Poetry Soup. Yes, the Lord is still inspiring and still working. You can check it out on Poetry Soup. Just Google my name, Ronald Williams, poet, and it'll come up, and you can read some more poems I've written.
I think this is going to be an interesting book for everyone to pick up, and I think people are going to be blessed and inspired by one, your testimony and the poetry as well. The book is called Jesus Christ, the Messiah Visitation, a true story and testimony with inspired nature and Bible poems by author Ronald Williams. You can pick it up at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, and Kobo, just to name a few of the locations online as well as their brick-and-mortar stores. Ronald, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, Chris. God bless.
Up next on the Christian Faith Publishing Author Roundtable, we have an interesting book about the family dynamic and God's place in that. The book is called Meeting Eloise by author Mae Marie. Mae, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you. Glad you having me on today.
Now, tell everybody a little bit about your book.
Meeting Eloise is about a family setting. I'm a good old Southerner, Chris. I grew up in the South, and my family foundation is your mother, your father, your grandparents, your aunt. Sometimes we were all in one household, and that way we had to learn how to deal, how to enjoy each other, stay in our own zones, and do what we had to do in that family setting. Because remember, you had about 2 or 3 different generations in one household. But as I got older, I found out that was a foundation that was going to take me through life, because I had acquired so many different understanding about life through those different settings in my family.
Now, what made you decide to write this book?
Well, in honor of my mother. My mother died when I was 18 years old. Mm-hmm. The first name, Mae, is my mother's first name. Marie is my sister and my middle name. So Mae Marie is in honor of my sister and my mother. So my pen name is Mae Marie in honor of my mother and my sister. My mother, when she died at 18, all her energy went toward my sister and I, because we had 3 younger brothers that we had to raise. And by being in a family setting of those 3 or 4 generations, we stepped right in the place where my mother was when she passed, to carry on the family, because we knew what to do by growing up in a family with that many different generations being involved.
Now, what do you think is one of the advantages of having all the different generations involved in the family dynamic and teaching one another?
You know what, Chris? I grew up in the early 60s. Back in those days, we had a church setting foundation, and I still believe that if we do what God says do, bring for the child in the way he should go. When he's older, he will not depart. I still believe we must get back to the basic Christian foundation of raising a family. I had no problem figuring out who Mae Marie was. My brothers had no problem figuring out who they were because of the Christian family teachings. I think we must get back to that basic family teaching where we can say that, hey, God is the God of our home.
Now, is this your first publication?
Yes, sir. Yes, it is. But, Chris, I've been writing for about 20 years. You know how you get a book and you get a piece of paper, you sit down and you just start writing?
Yeah.
And I've been doing it for about 20 years, though.
Now, how was it to be able to finally see your work in a book?
Chris, I'm a Southerner, and some of our word annex are really country. It was just like someone eating cold watermelon in the summertime. You get a chill all over your body. Chris, I was just in a daze. My whole body was like, ooh. It was such a joy to know that someone realized that God is still God, and he's still God of the family. Chris, we must keep telling it. God still is the God of the home.
Now, when somebody picks up this book, what do you hope is the greatest message that is driven home to them?
We go back to Genesis, how God created the family, man and woman. Okay, in my household, it shows that it started with two people, my grandfather and my grandmother, then my mother and my father, then the children. We must go back to the very basics where it says, how God put it in place and let it go from there. We must continue on what God put in place for the family.
Well, I think this is going to be a great book and really helping people understand the foundation of what a family should be. The book is called Meeting Eloise by author Mae Marie. You can pick it up at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, Kobo, just to name a few of the online locations as well as their brick-and-mortar stores. And Mae Marie, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
And now on the Christian Faith Publishing Author Roundtable, as somebody who's dabbled in poetry a little bit, I'm always interested to see and hear other people's work, and that's what this is. The book is called Words of Inspiration by author Teddy Vanover. Teddy, thanks for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, I'll tell everybody a little bit about this book you've written.
Well, it's a book that I started writing probably a year ago. I've been writing poetry for a while, and I decided to make a book out of it. People had been telling me I need to, so I thought I would do it. But it's a book about poetry, about the gospel of Jesus Christ and the salvation that he offers.
Now, you've been working on these poems for quite some time, I'm sure. How was it to be able to go back and pick and choose? And what was the process you went through in compiling this list of poems for this book?
Well, I'd written several poems, as I said earlier, and what I went through was I went to my list and I read each poem and picked the ones that I thought that would be an inspiration to other people and that it would touch their hearts, that they might see what God can do for us.
And what are some of the subjects that you tackle in these poems?
Some of them relate to what God has done in my life. Some of them relate to what God can do in other people's lives. A couple of them is about our country and the direction that I think that we're going, which is not the right direction at the moment. Mm-hmm. That's mainly what they're about. When
people read this book, what do you hope they get from reading your poems, and what do you think is the overall message that you hope they get from this?
What I hope is that they can look at their life and see that as long as they're breathing, there's a chance for God to touch their hearts, that he can save them and save them from damnation and hell. I don't know if I can say that on the radio, but that's the point that I want to try to get across.
Now, is this your first publication?
Yes, it is my first book.
How was the publishing process, getting this in this collection of poems and finally getting it into book form?
It was a long process, but it opened my eyes to what it takes to become a published author. So it was enjoyable.
I got to imagine pretty fulfilling once you finally get that book in your hand and be able to see your work come to somewhat of a completion.
Yes, it was. It was a point of pride that I did this, and I hope that other people enjoy it as much as I did in writing it.
Now, do you have any plans on maybe doing another book of poetry?
I've got several poems that I have been writing since this has been published, so there's a possibility.
Well, we look forward to hearing more from you, and of course, look forward to these Words of Inspiration. That is the title of the book, Words of Inspiration, by author Teddy Vanover. You can pick it up at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, and Kobo, just to name a few of the online platforms, as well as their brick-and-mortar stores. And again, I think this is going to be one of those books of poems that really inspires people, and you'll be truly blessed for the reading of it. And I want to thank Teddy for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, one of my favorite characters of the Bible. He's been the subject of movies and books and TV, and of course, one of the more intriguing characters, Moses. And that is the subject of our next book. The book is called Moses by Beverley Bolland. Beverley, thanks for being on the show today.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here today.
Now, tell everybody a little about this book, what they can expect.
This book takes place about 1446 B.C., and it's taken from the book of Exodus. Now, although this is a children's book, it's a test of our faith in God during our trials of life, and it's for us all. Now, sometimes we can lose hope and faith, and we feel that God isn't with us, but He's always there. Now, this story takes place with the birth of Moses as a baby. He was raised by Pharaoh's daughter, because the Levite mother wasn't able to raise him, and she put him in a basket as a baby and let him float down the river, hoping that someone would rescue him. Well, Moses was raised by the Egyptians, and until he grew up, he found out that the Israelites had been mistreated by the Egyptians, so this made him approach Pharaoh, and it made Pharaoh angry when Moses asked him to let the Israelites go, and he threatened to kill Moses. So Moses fled for his life, and he left the land of Egypt. Well, one day, as Moses was working in the field, he heard the voice of the Lord telling him to go back to Egypt because he wanted Pharaoh to let his people go. So Moses was being obedient to God, and he went back to Pharaoh and asked him to let the Israelites go, but Pharaoh refused. So that angered the Lord at that moment, and he sent many plagues to the land of Egypt, but Pharaoh still didn't surrender. So finally, the Lord sent the angel of death to the land of Egypt, and he said he was going to kill the firstborn male of every Egyptian, which included Pharaoh's son. So after this happened, and the death of his son, he decided to let the Israelites go. So Moses took the Israelites, and they were on their journey to the land of Canaan, which is called the land of milk and honey. But as they were approaching the Red Sea, the people saw that Pharaoh was still after them. He was planning to kill them. So they were so frightened. So Moses was speaking to the Lord, and the Lord told Moses at that moment, he said, to raise your staff to the sky, and I will part the Red Sea so the Israelites can cross on dry land. So Moses obeyed what the Lord said, and as the Israelites were crossing the sea, Pharaoh's army still was approaching them. And as they came toward the water, the sea closed, and all his army drowned. So this shows us that the Lord is faithful and that He loves us unconditionally.
Now, what was it about Moses that made you decide to write this book?
Well, I was already writing about different characters in the Bible before Moses. I had just started keeping journals several years ago just about things that happened in my life. And at the point when I knew the Lord wanted me to publish a book, He directed me toward Moses. He gave me the description, how many pages and all that. So Moses was the one that was chosen for me, and it's been very exciting. Because I was thinking back 2 years ago when I saw the Ten Commandments, it just all brought back memories. I'm just very excited to be able to do this.
This is a children's book, but I got to imagine that not just children, I think adults can really learn a lot and get a lot from it as well. Was that kind of your intention when you started writing this?
Right, exactly right. Even though we all start out as children, we need to know God's power, and as children and to adults, to help us live a more peaceful life and keep our faith. Yes, I say even though it is a children's book, it's for all of us.
I know you said you've been writing for a while, but is this your actual first publication?
This is actually my first publication because I started writing back maybe like in 1996, and it was just like inspirational writings. But at that time, I had no idea that a publication would ever come in existence. But this is my very first book.
Now, how was it working with Christian Faith Publishing and actually being able to see your writings finally in book form?
A wonderful experience. I was so excited, and at first I didn't realize how much it was going to be published because I looked one day. One of the editors told me to look, and it was on YouTube. That's when I really got excited. I saw the music and all that, just like I was watching a movie. I was very, very excited, and they were just wonderful to work with.
What do you hope is the most important message people, whether it's kids or adults, get from reading this book?
I hope that they can see that God is faithful at all times, and no matter how many trials or circumstances we have, that He will never leave us nor forsake us, and He's always there for us and loves us all unconditionally.
And of course, everyone should be looking forward to picking up this book. It's called Moses by Beverley Bolland. You can pick it up at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, and Kobo, just to name a few of the locations. And I encourage everyone to pick it up and learn about this amazing character from the Bible. And of course, I want to thank Beverley for being on the show today.
Thank you so much. You have a blessed day.
And of course, every Christian at one point or another has wondered what heaven is like, and it's always interesting to hear stories about heaven when people get a glimpse of it, whether it be a near-death experience or another situation, and that's what this next book is about. It's called A Composite Portrait of Heaven, What We Learn About Heaven from People Who Have Been There, by Dr. Jacques LaFrance. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you. I'm honored.
Now, tell everybody a little bit about this book.
Well, I took 16 books that I've read about people having died and been to heaven. 19 different testimonies are covered, and I've taken those apart, and I've listed, according to different topics, what each person has said about that topic. And so it gives a more complete picture of heaven than any one book by itself does. Also, I have recorded 7 stories of people who went the wrong way, and fortunately came back, and they found the experience very terrifying. They do not want to repeat it. On the other hand, all those who went to heaven are really looking forward to being back there.
Now, what made you decide to sit down and write this book?
Well, I was teaching a class last summer, which I covered several topics, and one of them was this topic. And what I did is I wrote out different features of heaven and listed where this was talked about in each of the books. And in each class, we pick out a topic, and I would go to those books and read from them. And after that class was over, I thought, I really don't want to carry around 16 books with me and be flipping back and forth. So I decided to start copying the information down. Well, it got bigger and bigger, and that eventually led to this book.
And how long did it take you to compile all these stories and put this book together?
Well, since I had done all the research already and had it, it only took me 5 weeks to get it all written. And then I had to spend 2 more weeks because I had to take out all the direct quotations because I was violating copyright, and I didn't get approval for that. So that took 2 more weeks.
Now, when people pick this up, who do you think is going to be the target reader, and why do you think they're going to like your book?
I think the people who pick this up will be people who are concerned about what happens to them when they die. Christians particularly will pick it up because they know where they're going, and they will be excited to read more about it, a more complete picture than what Revelation gives us. Others, I hope, will read it because they really need to know where they're going because they may not be sure, and this will help them see clearly what the choices are and what it takes to get there.
Now, what do you hope is the main message that people get when they read this book?
As Colton Burpo said in Heaven is for Real, God really, really loves us, Dad. You can't believe how much God loves us. I want people to be humbled and awed when they see how much God loves us by how much He's done to prepare this eternal home for us. One author said that God's love for us is even greater than that of the Son. So I want people to see how important it is to be cleansed from all your sins so they will be not recorded in heaven anymore, and you'll be able to enjoy this gift that God has given us.
And why do you think this message is so important for the readers?
Well, every one of us is going to die. And according to Scripture, there's 2 choices. There's heaven and there's hell. There will be the judgment. And if your sins have been forgiven and God opens the book, there will be no record of your sins, and you'll be allowed to be in heaven. If you haven't been forgiven, the record shows that you've disobeyed God's rules. You can't allow anyone who disobeyed to be in heaven. So it's very important that people take a look at this. And my book makes it clear that there is a heaven, there is a hell. These are not just hallucinations or made-up stories. The fact that all these people record the same thing is a testimony that it's real. And the fact that there's slight differences is what you would expect from eyewitness testimony. And it makes a big difference.
Well, I think, yes, people are truly going to be blessed by reading this book and get a better sense of what heaven is going to be like when we finally get there. The book is called A Composite Portrait of Heaven, What We Learn About Heaven from People Who Have Been There, by author Dr. Jacques LaFrance. You can pick it up at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, and Kobo, just a few of the locations. Jacques, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, Chris. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us for the Christian Faith Publishing Author Roundtable. We'll be back next week with another great group of talented authors to discuss their books, their process, and how they were able to get their manuscripts published and out there for the world to enjoy. If you're a writer that is looking for a book publisher, give Christian Faith Publishing a call today at 1-800-955-3794 to receive a free publishing kit, or feel free to visit them on the web at christianfaithpublishing.com. Have a great weekend, everyone.